They called her barren. Her husband died, and the only thing his family saw when they looked at her was failure, the woman who could not give them an heir. So, they sold her. Not like a wife, not like a human, but like unwanted cattle. She stood on a wooden platform, trembling in shame, as rough voices shouted bids over her broken spirit. But fate has a cruel way of twisting, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind. Among the crowd, a rancher stood, holding a little girl with pigtails and big eyes clutching his shirt. He didn't raise his hand to claim her for her beauty or her body. He raised it because his daughter whispered softly, "Papa, she looks sad, can she come home with us?" That moment changed everything, and what followed was not a tale of possession, but of healing, of a widow who thought her worth was gone, and of a rancher who needed more than just hands to mend fences. He needed a heart to help raise his daughter. The sun was high, yet the air felt colder than it should have been. Clara stood on the splintered wooden platform with her hands clasped so tightly in front of her that her knuckles turned white. Her shoes were worn thin, dust clinging to the cracks, and the hem of her dress brushed her ankles in tatters. Around her, men gathered with the same anticipation they might have shown for cattle or horses, eyes roaming over her as though she were an object to be inspected, measured, and sold to the highest bidder. She had once been someone's wife, someone's daughter, someone's friend. But now, standing here with her heart hammering against her ribs, she was only something to be bought. Her husband had been gone 2 winters now, taken by fever that swept through their small town like wildfire. She had tried to grieve quietly, to pick herself up and manage what was left of the farm, but grief did not only leave her widowed, it left her branded. Without a child to show for her marriage, the whispers had followed her like smoke, growing louder, crueler, until they became the only truth people saw when they looked at her. She was barren, they said. A woman who couldn't bear a child was hardly a woman at all. And so, when debts came knocking, when her husband's family declared her a burden rather than blood, they made the decision for her. She would be sold. The auctioneer's voice thundered across the yard, smooth and quick, each syllable biting into her flesh. "Here's a strong one, widowed but capable. She can cook, she can sew, she can work a field. Don't let her looks fool you, she's still got years left of work in her bones. Who'll start me at 10? Clara's chest constricted as laughter rippled through the men. $10. That was all her life was worth. The sound of coins clinking in pockets, the scrape of boots shifting in the dirt, the sharp scent of tobacco in the air, it all swirled around her, heavy and suffocating. A man with missing teeth and a cruel twist to his smile lifted his hand lazily. 5, he called, and the auctioneer clapped his hands as though the game had begun. Her mouth went dry, and she closed her eyes against the sting of humiliation. She wanted to cry, but her tears had run out long ago. There was no point in crying when no one cared enough to wipe them away. She braced herself for the lowest bidder, for the kind of life that would reduce her further into nothingness. And then she heard it. A voice, quiet at first, almost drowned out by the shouts and jeers. "Papa, she looks sad. Can she come home with us?" Clara's eyes flew open. Through the blur of her vision, she saw them at the back of the crowd. A tall man stood with his hat pulled low, his frame solid and strong, his posture speaking of work and weather that had shaped him. But it was not him who had spoken. It was the little girl he held in his arms, perched on his hip as though she belonged there, with golden curls tumbling against her father's chest. The child was small, no more than 4, with eyes too large for her face and a softness in them that pierced Clara like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The man shifted, his jaw tightening as if he had not expected such words from his daughter. His hand rested lightly on her back as the auctioneer called again, louder, eager for another bid. 5, do I hear 6? $6 for this woman who can. 10. The man's voice cut across the yard, low and steady. Heads turned, eyes widened. $10 was more than most here were willing to spend on her, more than they thought she deserved. The toothless man sneered, lowering his hand, muttering about a fool wasting good money. Clara's heart thudded painfully. She did not understand why he had spoken, why he had chosen that moment. Her gaze darted toward him, and for a fraction of a second their eyes met beneath the shadow of his brim. His were not filled with hunger or cruelty like the others. They were steady, unreadable, but there was something there that made her chest ache. The hammer came down with a sharp crack. Sold. $10 to the rancher in the back. Her legs wobbled as she stepped off the platform, guided forward by the firm hand of the auctioneer. The world seemed distant, muffled, as though she were walking through a dream she could not wake from. She half expected the man to seize her roughly, to yank her forward as if she were already his possession. But instead, he extended a hand, palm open, waiting. She froze, trembling, her body taut with years of expecting harshness. When she did not move, the little girl leaned forward, her tiny fingers brushing against Clara's arm. "Don't be scared," she whispered, her voice like a fragile melody. "Papa says we're going home." Clara's throat closed, and for the first time in years, the tears threatened to return, not from despair, but from something else she didn't dare name. She looked at the man again, this stranger who had just altered the course of her life with one bid. He gave the smallest nod, his eyes unreadable, and for reasons she could not explain, she found herself taking the step toward him. The men around them muttered, their voices sharp with envy or scorn. One spat into the dirt, another chuckled darkly, calling after the rancher, "Good luck with that barren one, Hayes." But the man did not flinch. He turned his back on them, guiding Clara toward the waiting wagon, his daughter nestled between them like the bridge she did not yet know she was. As the wheels creaked and the horse pulled them away from the jeering crowd, Clara sat rigid, her hands folded in her lap. She dared not look at him too long, dared not ask why he had done what he did. All she knew was that for the first time in a long while, she was not standing alone in the cold. And though fear still gripped her, though shame still clung like a shadow, there was a spark, a fragile, trembling spark, that whispered maybe, just maybe, her story was not over. The Hayes Ranch stretched wide under a sky brushed with the soft hues of sunset, a land both wild and steady, a place where silence carried its own weight. The wagon wheels groaned as they rolled across uneven earth, carrying Clara toward an uncertain future. She sat stiffly on the seat, her hands folded in her lap, the child pressed against her side as though she had already claimed her as a source of comfort. The little girl's curls brushed Clara's arm, and every so often, she would glance up with wide eyes that held no judgment, only curiosity. Clara dared not return the look for too long, afraid of the warmth it stirred inside her. The rancher guided the horses. Without a word, his profile sharp against the fading light, he hadn't spoken since the auction yard, not beyond the simple gesture of helping her into the wagon. She tried to study him discreetly, wondering why a man would spend more than anyone else to bring home a woman with no value in the eyes of others. His hands were rough, steady on the reins, scarred in places from years of labor. His shoulders carried the weight of responsibility, but there was something in the set of his jaw, in the stillness of his presence, that felt less like ownership and more like endurance. When the wagon rattled to a stop, Clara's breath caught. Before her stretched acres of land dotted with cattle, their dark shapes moving slowly against the horizon. A wide barn stood nearby, its wood weathered but strong, and beyond that, a modest house with smoke curling faintly from its chimney. It was not a grand place, not the kind of home found in storybooks, but there was a quiet sturdiness to it, as though it had endured storms and seasons and would continue to do so long after they were gone. The rancher climbed down, then turned to help his daughter first. Clara waited, expecting him to extend the same hand to her, but he stepped back slightly, giving her room to climb down on her own. The small courtesy unsettled her more than if he had taken her arm. It spoke of restraint, of respect, and it made her heart twist in confusion. Men she had known before never asked, they simply took. Inside the house, warmth wrapped around her in the form of firelight and the faint smell of stew lingering from earlier in the day. The rooms were simple, sparsely furnished, but they held a certain orderliness that spoke of a man doing his best to raise a child while working land that never rested. He showed her to a small room off the main hall, its bed neatly made, a single quilt folded at the end. "This will be yours," he said, his voice low, careful, as though he did not want to startle her. Clara nodded, unsure what to say. She half expected the command that usually followed, the demand for obedience, for servitude, for a woman's body to be claimed as part of the bargain. But no such words came. He left her with a nod and went to settle his daughter into her room, leaving Clara alone in silence that felt heavier than the crowd at the auction yard. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling in her lap, wondering what kind of man bought a woman only to give her a room of her own. The next morning began before dawn, the sound of roosters crowing and the faint creak of boots on wooden floorboards pulling her from a restless sleep. When she entered the kitchen, she found him already dressed for the day, pouring a cup of coffee while his daughter sat at the table, swinging her legs and rubbing sleep from her eyes. Clara hesitated in the doorway, uncertain of her place, until the child looked up and smiled. "Morning," she said brightly, her voice carrying none of the hesitation Clara felt. "Morning," Clara whispered back, and something inside her eased at the simple kindness. She busied herself with the stove, preparing breakfast without being asked, not because it was demanded but because it felt like something she could give. The rancher did not stop her, nor did he thank her as though she were a servant. He simply sat, his eyes lowering to his coffee, but she felt his quiet watchfulness all the same. Days turned into a rhythm. She swept the floors, mended clothes, cooked meals, and cared for the little girl who followed her with questions and laughter that filled the spaces of silence. Clara found herself softening in ways she thought were lost to her, smiling when the child tugged at her hand, humming while she braided her golden hair in the mornings. At night, when the girl curled against her and whispered about dreams and fears, Clara held her close, and the emptiness inside her no longer felt so wide. Still, shadows lingered. Clara knew the cruelty of tongues, the way people whispered. When Samuel's neighbors stopped by one evening, their laughter loud, their eyes sharp, the old shame returned to her chest like a brand. "Hayes," one man chuckled, "you paid good money for that widow, but she ain't gonna give you sons. What good's she to a man like you?" Clara's cheeks burned, her throat tightening. She wanted to vanish, to hide from the sting of their words. She braced herself for silence, for agreement, for the confirmation that she was nothing more than they claimed. But Samuel's voice cut through, firm as steel. "She's good because my daughter needs more than hands to feed her. She needs someone who knows how to love." The words struck her harder than any insult ever could. No one had defended her like that, not even her late husband. She looked at him in disbelief, but his gaze never wavered, his tone carrying such quiet conviction that the men shifted uncomfortably and left without another word. That night, Clara tucked the little girl into bed, her heart too full, her mind too tangled. The child's small hand clung to hers, her voice drowsy with sleep. "Are you gonna stay forever?" she asked softly. Clara's throat closed around the answer she couldn't give. She wanted to promise forever, but her past whispered too loudly. She had been cast aside, sold, marked as worthless. Forever felt like a dream too fragile to speak aloud. She simply smoothed the child's hair, kissing her forehead gently, and whispered, "Sleep now." When she stepped into the hallway, Samuel was there, leaning against the doorframe, the lamplight casting shadows across his face. His eyes met hers, steady, searching, and though he said nothing, his silence carried meaning. He did not push, did not demand an answer. Instead, he gave a small nod, as if to tell her that she didn't need to decide tonight, that healing did not come all at once. And in that unspoken moment, Clara felt something stir deep within her, a fragile seed planted in the ashes of her past. Perhaps she was not barren after all. Perhaps she had been meant to love differently, to nurture not with blood but with heart, to mend not only clothes and meals but lives. And though she could not yet say the words aloud, she began to wonder if this quiet ranch, this steady man, and this tender child might one day become the family she thought she would never have.